In the spring of 1923, a 7-year-old girl named Etta May lay dying in a coal company shack in Harlan County, Kentucky. Her fever had burned for 4 days. Her father had walked 6 miles down the holler to beg the Stone Mountain Coal Company doctor to come up the mountain. The doctor said no. The family did not have the $1.50 he charged for a house call, and the miners' strike that spring had cut off credit at every store in town. So her grandmother, a 71-year-old woman named Sarah Cumberland, who everyone called Granny Sari, walked out into the woods behind the shack with a paring knife and a feed sack. She came back with 3 handfuls of plants. 3 days later, Etta May sat up in bed and asked for cornbread. The company doctor, when he finally heard about it, told the foreman it was nothing but luck. He was wrong. Appalachia, somewhere between 1850 and 1950. Across a stretch of mountain country running from West Virginia down through eastern Kentucky, western Virginia, eastern Tennessee, and into North Carolina, there were women like Granny Sari in every single holler. They were called granny women, yarb doctors, root workers, healers. They had no medical license, no formal training, and no clinic on the property. What they had was a memory passed down 5 generations deep, a working knowledge of 70 or 80 mountain plants, and a fee schedule that came to $0. They were paid in eggs, in quilts, in a sack of cornmeal, in a chicken at Christmas. Some of them delivered every baby in a county for 40 years and never saw a federal tax return. And when the last of them died, somewhere around the 1970s, we lost a 1,000-year-old library of working medicine that nobody ever bothered to write down. Number 17 on this list was used on the front lines of the First World War to save thousands of soldiers from dying of infection, and then mainstream medicine forgot about it for 60 years until a group of Scottish researchers rediscovered it. Number 4 was so dangerous that a granny woman who used it wrong could kill her patient inside an hour, yet it was still in regular use in 3 Kentucky counties as late as 1962. And the one at number 1 is not a plant or a poultice. It is the thing that contained all the others, and the day it disappeared is the day the entire tradition ended. Before we start, hit that subscribe button so the rest of this series finds you. Let's count down the 25 lost Appalachian folk medicine cures your mountain grandparents used long before a doctor ever set foot in their county. Number 25. Spiderwebs to stop bleeding. Every Appalachian child knew, by the time they could climb the loft ladder, that if you cut your hand bad on the wood axe, the first thing you did was run to the smokehouse and grab a fistful of spiderweb from the back corner. You balled it up, pressed it hard onto the cut, and held it there. The bleeding stopped inside 2 minutes. Modern biomaterials researchers have confirmed what the granny women already knew. Spider silk is rich in vitamin K, the same vitamin the body uses to trigger clotting, and the protein structure of the web itself accelerates platelet aggregation against the cut surface. A clean web from a barn rafter was, in functional terms, a coagulant bandage. It was free, it was hanging right there, and it worked. Number 24. Pine sap for splinters and drawing infection. Walk into any holler in October, and the white pine and the yellow pine were bleeding a sticky amber resin that the granny women collected in small tin cups. Spread on a wound, the sap drew out splinters overnight, sealed the skin against airborne bacteria, and pulled infection up out of the tissue. The Cherokee had been using pine resin for at least 4 centuries before the Scots-Irish settlers arrived in the 1700s. The Cherokee taught the settlers, and the settlers taught their grandchildren, who eventually forgot. A 2014 paper from the University of Eastern Finland confirmed that pine resin terpenes are demonstrably antimicrobial against both Staphylococcus and Streptococcus bacteria. A child with a splinter got a dab of pine sap pressed on overnight, and by sunrise the splinter was sitting on the surface of the skin, ready to be wiped off with a thumb. Number 23. Plantain leaf for stings, bites, and poison ivy. The Cherokee called it the white man's foot because it grew wherever European settlers walked. the broad-leafed plantain weed that pops up in every yard, sidewalk crack, and pasture in the eastern United States. A granny woman who saw a child running back to the cabin with a hornet sting on the arm would tell that child to chew up a plantain leaf and slap the wad of green spit paste straight onto the welt. The pain stopped in under a minute. A 1996 study in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed that plantain contains orcubin, a compound with measurable anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties, and that the same compound neutralizes the formic acid in ant and hornet venom. Today, that plant is sprayed with herbicide as a weed across every American suburb. 100 years ago, it was the most reached-for remedy in the entire Appalachian medicine chest. Number 22. Mullein leaves smoked for asthma and chronic cough. The tall, fuzzy-leafed mullein plant grew in every roadside ditch and overgrown pasture from Pennsylvania to Georgia. Granny women dried the broad, gray-green leaves on the smokehouse rafters all summer, and when winter hit and the children started wheezing with bronchitis or asthma, she rolled the dried leaves into thin paper cigarettes and had the child smoke one or two. Inhaled mullein vapor relaxes bronchial passages and breaks up mucus, a fact confirmed in modern ethnopharmacology research. Mullein cigarettes were sold in American pharmacies as an over-the-counter asthma treatment until the 1940s. They were not a folk superstition. They were a documented working pharmaceutical that the FDA quietly let disappear once corticosteroid inhalers took over the market in the 1950s. Number 21. Catnip tea for colicky babies. A screaming infant at 2 in the morning in a one-room mountain cabin was not just exhausting, it was dangerous. A baby that could not settle could not nurse, and a baby that did not nurse in the winter of 1925 could die inside a week. So the granny women kept a bundle of dried catnip leaves on a shelf above the stove. They steeped a quarter teaspoon in a cup of hot water, let it cool until it was barely warm, and fed it to the baby by the spoonful. The infant settled inside 10 minutes and slept 5 hours. Modern pharmacology research has confirmed that catnip contains nepetalactone, a mild sedative that works on the same neural receptors as valerian root, and that it is safe in tiny doses for infants. The cats, by the way, were not getting high. They were responding to the same compound that calmed the babies. Number 20. Onion poultice on the feet to break a fever. This one sounds like superstition until you understand the mechanism. A child running a fever of 103 degrees would have a sliced raw onion strapped to the bottom of each foot with a strip of cotton cloth. By morning, the onion was black, soft, and reeking, and the fever was usually gone. The mountain women said the onion drew the fever out. What was actually happening is that the sulfur compounds in raw onion, particularly allicin, are absorbed through the thin skin of the feet and into the bloodstream, where they trigger a measurable anti-inflammatory response. The black color was bacterial die-off pulled to the surface. The smell was the proof the medicine had worked. Most pediatricians today have never heard of it. 3 generations ago, every mother in 3 states did it once a week. Number 19. Cabbage leaf poultices for arthritis and swelling. When a coal miner came home with a hand swollen up like a baseball glove from getting it caught between the mine cars, his wife pulled the outer leaves off a cabbage head, ran a rolling pin across them to bruise the veins, warmed them on the stove, and wrapped them tight around the joint with a flour sack bandage. By morning, the swelling was down 2/3. The cabbage was black. He could grip a shovel again. A 2016 randomized controlled trial published in Clinical Rheumatology found that cabbage leaf poultices reduced osteoarthritis pain and inflammation about as effectively as topical diclofenac gel. Cabbage seed cost a nickel in 1925 and grew anywhere there was dirt. The granny women in the coal camps used cabbage leaves on knees, ankles, and shoulders all winter. The mine hospital used aspirin and morphine, and a bill the miner could not pay. Number 18. Vinegar wraps for breaking a fever. If onion on the feet did not bring the fever down, the next step was vinegar wraps. The granny woman soaked thin cotton sheets in a basin of cold apple cider vinegar cut with water, wrung them out almost dry, and wrapped them around the patient's chest, neck, and forearms. As the vinegar evaporated off the skin, it pulled heat off the body fast, dropping core temperature by 1 to 2 degrees in 20 minutes. A 2003 study in the Journal of Pediatric Nursing confirmed that vinegar water sponging is about as effective as ibuprofen for breaking a high pediatric fever, with no liver impact. Aspirin had only been on the American market since 1899, and it cost 10 cents a tin, which was real money. Apple cider vinegar was free if you had an apple tree, and every Appalachian farm had an apple tree. First pattern break. The next remedy on this list is the one that saved thousands of soldiers from dying of infected wounds in the trenches of the First World War. And then medical science forgot about it for 60 years until a group of Scottish researchers rediscovered it in the late 1980s. Number 17. Sphagnum moss for wounds. The pale green sphagnum moss grew in the cool, damp boglands of West Virginia, Kentucky, and eastern Tennessee, and the granny women had been using it as a wound dressing for at least 200 years before the British Army got desperate enough in 1914 to try it. A handful of clean, dried sphagnum, pressed onto an open cut and bandaged in place, absorbed up to 20 times its dry weight in blood and pus, killed bacteria on contact, and accelerated healing. The British Medical Corps used over 1 million sphagnum dressings in World War I, and they cut infection rates among the wounded by more than half compared to cotton gauze. Modern wound care research confirmed that sphagnum contains sphagnum, a unique pectin-like polymer that is actively antimicrobial against staph, strep, and E. coli. The mountain women had been packing it into axe wounds since the 1700s. The Pentagon rediscovered it in 2009 for use in field-stocked combat trauma kits. Number 16. Honey and cornmeal poultice for burns. The smokehouse fire, the coal stove, the lard kettle, the iron skillet. Burns were so common in mountain kitchens that the granny women kept a small crock of raw honey mixed with fine yellow cornmeal on a shelf next to the stove. The instant a burn happened, a half-inch layer of the mixture went straight on the skin and was covered with a clean rag. The pain stopped inside a minute. Blisters did not form. The burn healed in half the time of an untreated burn, with no scarring. A 2013 Cochrane review of 30 clinical trials concluded that raw honey is significantly more effective than standard silver sulfadiazine cream for second-degree burns, with faster healing and lower infection rates. Major American and British hospital systems began using medical-grade honey dressings in burn units around 2018. Granny Sari had it on a shelf in 1923. Number 15. Slippery elm bark for sore throat, ulcers, and dysentery. Stripping the inner bark of the slippery elm tree was a spring chore on every Appalachian farm. The bark was dried in long strips on the porch rafters, then ground into a fine pinkish powder. Mixed with hot water, it formed a sticky gel that coated the throat, the esophagus, and the stomach lining. A child with a raw throat from croup got a teaspoon of slippery elm gruel and slept through the night. A grown man with a bleeding stomach ulcer ate a bowl of it 3 times a day for 2 weeks, and the bleeding stopped. The FDA still recognizes slippery elm as an over-the-counter demulcent today. The tree itself is now considered threatened in the wild because of overharvesting in the early 20th century, and most commercial slippery elm now comes from cultivated farms in Tennessee and Pennsylvania. Number 14. Yarrow flowers to stop heavy bleeding. The white-flowered yarrow plant grew on every roadside and pasture edge in the mountains, and its scientific name, Achillea millefolium, comes from the Greek hero Achilles, who supposedly used it to staunch the bleeding of his soldiers at Troy. The Appalachian granny women had been using crushed yarrow on hemorrhaging postpartum mothers for 2 centuries. Pressed onto a wound or a torn perineum, fresh yarrow stops bleeding inside 90 seconds. A 2011 paper in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology confirmed that yarrow contains a chilein, a compound that triggers the same clotting cascade as a modern hemostatic agent. Before the granny women had access to oxytocin or any pharmaceutical, they had a yarrow poultice, and the maternal mortality rate in some rural Appalachian counties between 1880 and 1920 was actually lower than the maternal mortality rate in some major American cities during the same period. Number 13. Garlic for infections. A child with a strep throat or a swollen abscessed tooth had a clove of raw garlic crushed and stuffed into a clean cotton sock, and the sock went on the bare foot at bedtime. By morning, the infection had measurably eased. The granny women said the garlic walked through the body. What was actually happening is that allicin, the active sulfur compound in crushed raw garlic, is absorbed transdermally and shows up in the bloodstream within 30 minutes. Modern antibiotic research has confirmed that allicin is active against penicillin-resistant strains of Staphylococcus and is one of the most studied natural antibiotics in the literature. Penicillin was not commercially available in rural Appalachia until 1946. Before that, garlic was the only antibiotic anyone in the hollers had ever heard of, and it kept a lot of children alive. Number 12. Mustard plaster for pneumonia and deep chest cold. Pneumonia killed more Appalachian children under 5 than any other single illness from 1900 to 1940. The granny woman's response was a mustard plaster, 2 tablespoons of ground black mustard seed mixed with flour and warm water until it formed a thick paste, spread on a square of muslin and laid hot across the patient's chest for 15 minutes. The mustard generated counter-irritant heat that drew blood and white cells to the lungs, broke up the deep mucus, and helped the patient cough out the infection. It also raised an angry red welt on the chest that lasted 3 days. Modern dermatology research has confirmed that the counter-irritant mechanism is real and measurable. Mustard plasters were standard issue in American hospitals until antibiotics replaced them in the 1950s. A granny woman could mix one in 40 seconds. Number 11. Boneset tea for fever. The plant called boneset grew wild along every creek bottom in the southern Appalachians, and it got its name during the dengue fever outbreaks of the late 1800s, when the fever was so violent it felt like every bone in the body was breaking. Boneset tea, made from the dried leaves boiled in water, brought the fever down inside an hour and stopped the bone aches. The Confederate Army used boneset by the wagon load during the Civil War. A 1999 paper in Planta Medica confirmed that boneset extract has measurable antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties, and follow-up research showed it activates the same immune pathway as modern interferon therapy. Quinine, the only commercial fever drug available before 1900, cost about $1 an ounce, almost a day's wages for a working man. Boneset grew free in the ditch behind the cabin. Quick reminder: if you are enjoying this trip through the lost world of Appalachian medicine, hit subscribe so the rest of this series finds you. There is a follow-up coming on the disappearing food preservation methods of the same region, and it is almost finished. Number 10. Sassafras tea as the spring tonic. Every March in the Appalachian Highlands, the men of the family went out into the woods with a digging fork and dug up the long red roots of the young sassafras trees. The roots were scrubbed, sliced thin, and boiled for an hour to make a rich orange-red tea that the whole family drank by the quart for 2 weeks straight. It was called the spring tonic. It thinned the blood after a winter of heavy fatty meat, raised energy, and cleared the skin. Sassafras was so popular by 1850 that root harvesters were shipping it by the boxcar from Knoxville to Boston for use in commercial root beer. The FDA banned the safrole compound in sassafras in 1960 after a rat study showed liver tumors at extreme doses. The mountain people drank it for 300 years, and the rate of liver disease in eastern Kentucky was below the national average that whole time. Number 9. Black cohosh for women's monthly pain and difficult childbirth. The dark, twisted root of the black cohosh plant was the most important plant in the entire Appalachian women's medicine cabinet. A granny woman delivering a baby that was stalled in labor would brew a strong tea from the dried root, and within an hour the contractions resumed and the baby came. For monthly cramps, the same tea was drunk hot 3 times a day. For hot flashes during the change of life, it was drunk cold. The eclectic medical movement in 1880s America actually adopted black cohosh from the granny women and sold it as the active ingredient in Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, which was the best-selling proprietary medicine in America from 1876 to 1925. A 2007 paper in the journal Menopause confirmed that black cohosh extract reduces vasomotor symptoms about as well as low-dose hormone replacement therapy without the cancer risk. Number 8. Raspberry leaf tea for late pregnancy and labor. Granny women in the southern mountains had been telling pregnant women for 2 centuries to drink red raspberry leaf tea every day through the last 6 weeks of pregnancy. The tea was said to tone the uterus, soften the labor, and shorten the delivery. A 2001 clinical study published in an Australian midwifery journal found that women who drank raspberry leaf tea daily in the last weeks of pregnancy had measurably shorter second-stage labors and required fewer forceps deliveries than the control group. The active compound is fragarine, a uterine tonic that selectively strengthens the smooth muscle of the womb. American obstetricians have quietly started recommending raspberry leaf tea in the last 10 years. The granny women had been recommending it since the 1700s. Number 7. Cloves and whiskey for the toothache. A bad tooth in the holler in 1920 meant one of 3 things. You suffered, you let the village blacksmith pull it with pliers, or you used the granny woman's remedy. She put 2 whole dried cloves between the bad tooth and the cheek, and gave you a small swallow of corn whiskey to hold in your mouth over the cloves for 5 minutes. The pain went to 0 inside 3 minutes. Eugenol, the active oil in clove, is a documented topical anesthetic that blocks the sodium channels in the nerve endings of the tooth pulp. American dentists still use eugenol in temporary dental cement and root canal sealers today. A bottle of clove oil cost 40 cents at the general store in 1925, which was a lot, but a single tin of dried cloves lasted a family 10 years, and the whiskey was made on the back porch. Number 6. Mullein flower oil for earache. Earaches in mountain children were dangerous because an infection that went untreated could rupture the eardrum, or in the worst cases, travel into the bone behind the ear and kill the child. The granny women's response was mullein flower oil. The yellow flowers of the mullein plant were picked in July, packed into a glass jar full of olive oil or sunflower oil, and set on a sunny windowsill for 6 weeks until the oil turned gold. 3 drops of the warmed oil into a sick child's ear at bedtime stopped the pain inside 10 minutes and cleared the infection in 2 days. A 2003 randomized controlled trial at the Tel Aviv University School of Medicine showed that mullein flower ear drops were about as effective as topical antibiotic drops for pediatric ear infections. Pediatric urgent care visits for ear infections in America now run around $300 a visit. Second pattern break. The next 3 remedies on this list are the ones where modern peer-reviewed science has caught up the hardest. The granny women were not guessing. Number 5. Golden seal root for every infection. The yellow-rooted plant called golden seal grew in the rich shade of the hardwood forest, and the granny women dug it in the fall, dried it in the loft, and ground it into a fine yellow powder. Sprinkled on a wound, it killed bacteria. Brewed into a tea, it cleared a urinary infection. Used as a mouthwash, it stopped a gum infection cold. The active compound, berberine, is one of the most studied plant antibiotics in modern science, with documented activity against E. coli, Salmonella, Candida, and even some strains of MRSA. By 1900, golden seal was being shipped out of Appalachia in such quantities that it was nearly hunted to extinction in the wild, and most golden seal today is farmed under shade cloth in Ohio and North Carolina. Integrative medicine doctors now prescribe berberine routinely for blood sugar, gut infections, and metabolic syndrome. The granny women had been using it since the 1750s. Number 4. Bloodroot paste for skin cancers and growths. The bright orange-red root of the bloodroot plant produced a sap that the granny women used very carefully to remove skin tumors, warts, and what they called proud flesh. A small dab of bloodroot paste applied to a growth would, over the course of 1 or 2 weeks, kill the growth tissue down to clean skin and let it slough off. The active compound is sanguinarine, which has been confirmed in peer-reviewed work to selectively trigger apoptosis in malignant skin cells. The danger was that an inexperienced healer could apply too much or to the wrong tissue and cause a permanent disfiguring scar. The FDA has classified bloodroot as a dangerous substance for over-the-counter sale since 1978. A skilled granny woman could remove a basal cell carcinoma off a man's nose for free. A dermatologist's office charges around $400 today for the same job. Number 3. Comfrey poultice for broken bones. Comfrey was called knit bone, and there was nothing else like it in the mountain pharmacy. The dark green hairy leaves of the comfrey plant, mashed into a thick green paste and wrapped tight around a broken arm or a broken rib, accelerated the knitting of the bone by what mountain doctors estimated as 2 weeks on a 6-week fracture. A 2012 paper in the journal Phytomedicine confirmed that comfrey contains allantoin, a compound that demonstrably stimulates cell proliferation in connective tissue and bone matrix. A broken arm in 1923 in a coal camp meant 6 to 8 weeks out of the mine, no wages coming in, and a family on the edge of starvation. A comfrey poultice cutting that recovery to 4 or 5 weeks was the difference between a family surviving the winter and a family being thrown out of company housing. Third and final pattern break. The last 2 remedies on this list are the ones that almost vanished completely, and the one at number 1 is not a plant at all. Number 2. Willow bark tea for pain and fever. The white willow that grew along every creek bank in the Appalachian valleys had a bark that, peeled and boiled into a bitter tea, killed pain and broke fevers as reliably as any drug on earth. The granny women had been using it for headache, toothache, joint pain, and fever for centuries. In 1899, a chemist at the German pharmaceutical company Bayer synthesized the active compound in willow bark, called it acetylsalicylic acid, and trademarked it as aspirin. Bayer sold the same medicine the mountain women had been brewing for free, at 10 cents a tin. The Appalachian families who could not afford the tin kept brewing the bark. The bark worked. It just did not come in a bottle with a label. A 2005 paper in the journal Inflammapharmacology confirmed that whole willow bark extract has a longer pain-relieving effect than synthetic aspirin and produces less stomach irritation. Number 1. The granny woman herself, and the chain of memory that contained all the others. This is the master skill, and it was not a plant or a poultice or a tea. It was the woman who knew. A working granny woman in a holler in eastern Kentucky in 1925 carried in her head, with no written reference, the identification, harvesting season, drying technique, dosing schedule, and contraindications for somewhere between 60 and 90 different plants. She knew which combinations would kill a person and which combinations would save one. She had been taught the entire library by her mother and her grandmother, starting at the age of 6, through 40,000 hours of working alongside them. Ethnobotanists who went looking for these women in the late 1960s found that there were maybe 30 working granny women left in the entire southern Appalachian region. By the late 1980s, the number was under 10. The last widely documented working granny woman in the southern Appalachians, an Alabama herbalist named Tommy Bass, died in 1996. When she died, the chain broke. We did not just lose a list of remedies, we lost the woman who knew what to do when the doctor would not come. There is one detail in all of this that should bother you. The Granny Women's Library did not die because their medicine stopped working. Most of it works, and a respectable share of it has now been confirmed by peer-reviewed science. It died because the chain of transmission was broken in a single generation. The daughters of the Granny Women moved off the mountain in the 1940s and 1950s, took factory jobs in Cincinnati and Detroit, raised their own children on penicillin and pediatricians and a Sears Roebuck catalog, and the 70-plant library that had kept 5 generations of mountain families alive simply stopped getting passed forward. It was not stamped out by the FDA, it was not banned by the AMA, it was let go. And the families that let it go are now the same families paying $400 at an urgent care for the ear infection a mullein flower could have cleared in 2 days. Here is what you can do today. Pick one of these 25. Just one. Plant a comfrey root in the back corner of your yard. Buy a 1/4 pound of dried mullein leaf online. Make a small jar of pine sap salve next October when you are walking the woods. Then tell me in the comments which one you tried, and whether your grandmother ever mentioned it, because the chain is not all the way broken yet, and the people watching this video are the ones who can mend it.